It's no secret that anti-Semitism is on the rise. Throughout this year, the worldwide Jewish community has had to confront the ugliness of anti-Semitism from across the political spectrum, on the extreme left as well as on the extreme right. Which group presents more of a significant threat to the Jewish people? It's my pleasure to welcome Maayan Hoffman, the Jerusalem Post news editor, to introduce our next panel.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Lord Mendelsohn and Mr. Habib. I'm really looking forward to talking to you about this actually very challenging topic, the issue of the far right and the far left, and the anti-Semitism that is happening around the world. First, I just want to help us by being able to define some terms. When we talk about the far right, who are we talking about? What groups fall into that category? Lord Mendelsohn, maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, within the context of the far right, you talk about the political extreme of right-wing politics, which tends to be slightly conservative, revisionist, in some cases quite libertarian, but it's traditionally associated with right-wing notions about the state or identity or other sorts of things. And we can see that both in history and in contemporary terms. And some of them are strong prejudices about change, about the other, about those sorts of things. But of course, one of our great examples in history about how these political labels can be quite fluid is that the National Socialists, the Nazis, perhaps the most greatest example, were National Socialists. And the early movement had the Strasser right wing, which was avowedly left wing, but they were still seen as a national movement. So right wing, far right tends to be where we collect it on the political spectrum, but it doesn't always do justice to the nation about what the nature of the extremism, the politics, or even the anti-Semitism is.
Interesting. And now, Mr. Habib, maybe you can answer the same question about the far left.
The problem today, first of all, I want to forgive my English. I'm not a great English, but I hope that you will understand me. The extreme left today, it's the main problem that the extreme left is connecting today with all the Islamo-leftism party, and they don't hate Jews, they hate Israel, which is much more politically correct. Unfortunately, this connection killed in my country, in France. The extreme right don't have killed in the last year in France. Baruch Hashem, have we said, in the last, since the Second World War. Okay. But unfortunately, the diabolization of Israel and the connection between the extreme left and the Islamic movements arrived to, we begin with in 2006, Ilan Halimi have been killed, but just now, today, yesterday in Paris, begins the trial of Charlie, that everybody remember, and also Hyper Cacher. Yes. What says the guy of Hyper Cacher, the terrorist, that he wants revenge, Palestinian guys? When you see in all the extreme left city hall, flag of Palestine, street in name of terrorist, Palestinian terrorist, and diabolization.
So
Israel,
that's really...
of Israel, we have direct consequence because they kill. 12 Jews have been killed in the last year because we're Jews, all 100% by Islamic jihadist movements who are connected with extreme left.
That makes sense. So the extreme left are being connected to the anti-Israel movement. Now, as you mentioned, there have been countless examples of, on both sides, the far right and the far left, of anti-Jewish and anti-Israel attacks. Perhaps, Lord Mendelsohn, you could talk a little bit about what you've seen in your own community in the last year.
Well, I think there are two things. I mean, the first one is to say that left anti-Semitism has a deep history, well before Israel was created, well before the Zionist movement. Well, I shouldn't forget that. Many of the strains and strands of that still exist today, and some of the notions which are common to all extremes, notions about Jewish domination, world conspiracies, are very, very common. So it does predate it, and they are distinctive in their own way. And even within the context of left anti-Semitism, I would caution everyone to continue to think about some of the problems about what you would associate with progressive politics and the way in which you can adopt very negative very distinct stereotypes against Jews. Outside of the question of Israel, although Israel is a very fundamental part of what this is. Look, we have faced, as ever, the interesting, broad nature of the threats from the right, from some members of the Islamic community and some sections of the Muslim community, and from the left. And I think it's fair to say that those on the right, particularly in the UK, it's very different in other countries, but in the UK have been significant, but the state has been a strong intervention against their further actions, which minimizes the level of harm that's caused.
And do you have a specific example that you can share with us of one of these kind of attacks?
We had a real concern about the emergence of Britain First and a couple of Nation First and a couple of the extreme right movements which were associated with the potential for terrorism. But they've been disrupted by the forces of law and order in the UK. And actually we have had very limited electoral success in the far right. And I would actually say that for many Jews in Britain, the way in which the state and the public revile against the far right and they have had no electoral success is a great affirmation of the UK as a place where Jews should feel comfortable. Within the context of the Muslim community, we've had a significant diminution, very strong movements inside parts of the Muslim community who are addressing the anti-Semitism, much of which has very little to do with any notions associated with Islam. Much of it was a European export, which has been re-imported back to us. Our big challenge has been the rise of the progressive anti-Semitism, the left-wing anti-Semitism.
So in your estimation, do you feel that the left is threatening Jews more in your community?
I think it's important to understand that since the post-war period, and we've had some very turbulent times, particularly after the Second World War, that the largest polling and evidential data to suggest that Jews feel left comfortable in Britain was all around the prospect of Jeremy Corbyn becoming Prime Minister and taking power. We had a real mood in the community that Britain may not be a country in which they felt safe. And in that particular context, always they wish to continue to live. In that context, the notion of Jews feeling unwelcome in a country was a big change for the UK community and a matter that had to be addressed. And that came with very distinct features from areas of the far left. And there are very distinct problems long term, which we have to face. And it's been far too long for a phenomenon which has been around very strongly since the 1980s, that the world Jewish community and the others, in my view, have taken not necessarily the right lessons in how to deal with this particular phenomenon, not the range of things that we have to deal with, but this particular phenomenon. That was the real risk we had in the UK, and elements are present in America, in other parts of Europe, and even across the Middle East.
Amazing. So, Mr. Habib, I want to go back to you for a moment, and we talk about specific examples. France has actually had quite a number of anti-Semitic attacks in the last years. I believe the percentage of attacks has also gone up. Can you offer me one specific example of an attack that took place in your community?
We have hundreds of examples, and as I told you before, 12 Jews have been killed. Mireille Knoll have been killed. Sarah Halimi have been killed. On the children in Toulouse, Gabriel Sandler, le rabbin Jonathan Sandler, Myriam Monsonego, Ariel Sandler have been killed because they are Jew. Today you cannot teach, no longer talk about Shoah even in the school. It's become complicated because why? Because unfortunately, the diabolization of Israel, I can show you only what I received. I don't know if you can see that as a member of parliament because I'm close to Israel. Wow. It was last week I received this kind of thing on the movements of extreme left, extreme right. By the way, they have one thing in common. The hate of, one has the hate of Israel, and the second part has the hate of the Jew. And if I see the example of today of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, Jean-Luc Mélenchon is the head of a very strong party in France, which is La France Insoumise. When his friend, Mr. Corbyn, losing the election, what does he say? He say that Mr. Corbyn lose the election because the great rabbi of England, because Benjamin Netanyahu, and because of Kriv. It means because of Jews. That's exactly the same poncif, I don't know how to say it in English, that we have during years on year Jews as responsible of everything.
Exactly the same phenomenon, exactly.
Say Israel. And I am worried. I will tell you something. I'm not worried about Jew. I'm worried for my country, for France, and I'm worried for Europe because they begin with Jews, and after they kill journalists, they kill policemen, and they kill everybody. Like we have, on the link between the extreme left and Islamic movements is a reality. Because they want to be elected. You see what happened in Belgium, in Brussels area. Some of political guys saying if you want to be elected in those areas, you have to be close to Muslim movements. If not, you cannot be elected.
So let me ask you this question. Do you feel that anti-Israel and anti-Semitism have become one and the same thing? Lord Mendelsohn, why don't you start with that question?
No, I don't. I mean, I think they are distinctive. I think there are issues, and I think within the context of the left, just to call it to define it in relation to Israel, it gives a free pass to some of those people who have a view that Jews are powerful, that they are pernicious, that they have a terrible impact on the world, and that's got nothing to do with Israel. That's a deep-rooted view about Jews. And I would also say that one of the issues that's become very clear to us here is that you deal with intergenerational problems, and we're not addressing these things. So, for example, some people who are very strong activists against Israel, anti-Zionist or anti-Israel in their own terms, who feel very passionately against it, you will find many examples now that we're starting to pick up, sufficient to start to develop an evidence base, of their children are adopting anti-Semitic themes that draw not just from left or from Israel, but from anything about emotions about money or meanness or whatever, other notions. And that's because they are being taught to hate Jews and to become essentially extremists. And Mayer makes a very, very good point, which is that in the very febrile identity politics of where Europe is, and with some of the difficulties that we have, this feeds into this sort of problem. And what we have are deep ideological convictions, a left progressive wing which has not been checked, is not addressed, is not really well addressed as we should do in trying to get these people away from this form and brand of extremist politics. And that we've got quite a challenge in the long term. It reminds me, I was dealing with these issues of left anti-Semitism when I was a student in the 1980s. In fact, in 1988, I wrote a publication with another dealing with some of these people. And lo and behold, when they re-entered the Labour Party many, many years later, when they took it over under Jeremy Corbyn, it's the very same people. We make a mistake to forget that actually we're talking about ideology and politics here. We're talking about worldviews, and the only thing that social media has done is not about expanding it, but is really about making it much more visible. We need to really steel our institutions, our democratic institutions, our cultural institutions and others, to be able to deal with these things and to rebuild our politics and to try and move away from some of the acidic and lack of respect for the institutions that have served us well over the last 60, 70 years.
So let's talk about that a little bit, about tactics for mitigating these threats. Are there different tactics for approaching the right and the left? Mr. Habib, why don't you take that?
Sorry, what's again the question?
The question is what kind of tactics do we need to use in order to tackle anti-Semitism on the right and the left?
Okay, the tactic, first of all, is to continue to fight any racism, any anti-Semitism, from the right or from the left. It's to understand maybe the media is a very, very important part, if you allow me. When I see today, for example, the BDS movement, which is forbidden in some country like France, but continue to be very strong. Like, for example, we begin in the Tour de France, which is very popular, and I see that every day we have a movie of the BDS movement against the participation of a team of Israel in Tour de France. But what to tell you, the tactic is to show the image that we see in Israel today. This new, this plane which land from Tel Aviv and go to Abu Dhabi and Emirates is great to show that we can live in Europe, in Far West, and everywhere, Jew, Christian, and Muslim together, and to stop to diabolize Israel in any circumstance, and to stop, for example, the Hezbollah party, which is a terrorist party, and Germany understand, and many countries understand. I regret that my president, Emmanuel Macron, and the French politic of Quai d'Orsay continue to deal with the politic branch of Hezbollah, which is very worrying me. Hezbollah is directly responsible of the last blowing in Lebanon a few weeks ago. It's not any matter with the Jew or with Israel. So we have to finish with all the terrorist party, Hamas, Hezbollah, and so on. And we see a beginning of peace hopes, which are very, very interesting. And we have to show this picture, peace, salam, that we show in some Arab and Israeli newspaper. We have to show this in Europe, in France. Unfortunately, in my country, in France, almost we didn't spoke about this,
right.
about this agreement of peace,
which is a really big deal. I agree, definitely. So unfortunately, we are running out of time, and I think that this was an incredibly interesting conversation and one that needs to be continued as the months go by, because we are not seeing anti-Semitism getting any less. The left and the right in different countries are maintaining power. So I want to thank you very much for you coming on and discussing the different perspectives, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.